Welcome to Shelter Fundamentals Version 2. This course introduces the roles and responsibilities for opening up, operating, and closing a shelter during a disaster. This course focuses on what new shelter workers need to know to work in a shelter. Unit 1, Introduction. The purpose of this unit is to present the course objectives, explain the philosophy and principles of sheltering, emphasize the centrality of clients to shelter work, and illustrate the diversity of clients and their differing disaster experiences and needs. This unit focuses on the importance of serving clients, identifying and meeting their needs, that clients are central to sheltering, and that all those affected by disaster are welcome in our shelters. This course is designed to prepare you for the roles and responsibilities that you will perform at a Red Cross shelter. It will provide you with general information about the tasks you will perform, as well as specific procedures you will need to know. Upon completion of this training, you will be able to explain the Red Cross philosophy and principles of sheltering, identify client needs, describe different types of shelters, identify how a shelter is structured and operates, explain the functions and tasks that take place in shelters, and explain the kinds of work shelter service workers like you will perform and how to do it. What is a Red Cross shelter? It is a temporary, safe, and comforting refuge in time of disaster or emergency, a haven in which those affected regroup and consider next steps, a place where clients connect with services needed to begin recovery, and a community center where others can come for food, emergency supplies, information, and recovery services. We use the term client to indicate individuals receiving services from us because they have been affected by a disaster. This includes those sleeping in the dormitory, those coming for a meal or emergency supplies, and those coming to receive recovery services. The Red Cross mission statement establishes what we do. The American Red Cross prevents and alleviates human suffering in the face of emergencies by mobilizing the power of volunteers and the generosity of donors. Client-first sheltering is central to everything we do in shelters. Sheltering is not about facilities, processes, and rules, but about supporting people who need our help. We show compassion and make each person feel they are important. We work to understand and meet individual needs. Our aim is to help each person move toward a more sustainable location for their recovery. There is nothing more important to us than our clients, making them feel welcomed and supporting their needs. Everyone is welcome. All those affected by the disaster are welcomed in our shelters. Clients come from all walks of life and represent the entire community. We assist everyone regardless of race, color, national origin, religion, gender identity, age, disability, sexual orientation, citizenship, veteran status, or pre-disaster housing situations. We accommodate individuals with access and functional needs, visual or hearing impairments, and service animals. Our shelter clients have gone through different experiences and have varying needs. We work to support them all and address their individual needs. Take a listen to just a few examples provided here.
I was at work when the tornado struck. I tried to get home, but the roads were blocked. I don't even know if my house is still standing. I've been trying to reach neighbors, but I can't get through.
The police evacuated my office because of a train wreck that spilled chemicals. Are you going to be able to accommodate me while I am here?
My family and I left when the hurricane evacuation notice was issued. We got out with just a few things, and I don't know how we're going to survive until we get back home.
I was playing at a friend's house when the fire department came and said we had to leave because a wildfire was coming our way. I am having trouble reaching my mother.
My family and I were living in a tent beside the river in the state park. The water rose quickly and washed everything away. I don't know what we're going to do.
Unit 2, What Shelters Are Like and How They Are Organized. The purpose of this unit is to explain the importance of completing a job induction, identify steps for evaluating the condition of a facility, Practice organizing the reception area so that it is accessible to people entering the shelter. Practice setting up the registration area so that clients are processed efficiently and can share their personal information with registration workers in privacy. Identify internal and external signage. Explain how to set up an organized dormitory space. And describe the characteristics of an effective feeding area. The Red Cross may open a shelter whenever people are forced from their homes because of a disaster. How long a shelter is open varies. The type of disaster, the extent of damage, and the needs of clients will influence the length of time a shelter remains open. What causes the Red Cross to open shelters? Disasters and emergencies that destroy homes or force people out of them, such as apartment fires, storm damage, hurricane and wildfire evacuations and damage, tornadoes, floods, earthquakes, chemical accidents, or even volcanic activity. Different types of services designed to meet the needs of clients are offered in the various shelters. The type of shelter provided matches the disaster type and client needs. For example, a local evacuation center may be used to provide refuge after an apartment fire. A respite center may be used as a warming center, cooling center, or first responder rest center. A hurricane or wildfire evacuation center. A family assistance center might be used for families of individuals in an aircraft or train accident or after mass casualty events. A short-term shelter may be used to provide a location for clients to live temporarily and receive services for transition to new housing. A mega shelter is a very large shelter, often located in a convention center or sports arena. Staff shelters provide lodging, feeding, and relaxation shelter for Red Cross workers when commercial lodging is not available. Ideally, each facility will be spacious, have restrooms and showers, be accessible to individuals with functional and access needs, have a large parking lot, and be safe and secure for clients and workers. Facilities available in disaster areas determine site of congregate shelters. These may include community centers, churches, school gymnasiums, dormitories or barracks, malls and empty department stores, and convention centers. Shelters have various functional areas depending on facility size and clients. Which of these functions and services exist in a shelter depend upon the number of days a shelter is open and whether clients require these services. The shelter manager or site supervisor is responsible for all activities at the shelter. The shift supervisor oversees all shelter operational activities in the shelter for the day shift or the night shift. Function supervisors oversee and work with teams of workers assigned to carry out various functions. Shelter service workers are assigned functional tasks under the supervision of a functional supervisor. The number and types of supervisors will vary depending upon size of the shelter and number of clients. Shelter workers are organized in work groups under supervisors. Unit 3, Shelter Phases and the Work of Shelter Service Workers. The purpose of this unit is to identify the 3 phases of shelter work, provide an overview of the major tasks in the opening, operating, and closing phases of shelter activity, and explain the importance of information gathering and reporting. The 3 phases of operation determine the tasks of shelter service workers. Each phase has different tasks that need to take place, and you will help perform them as a shelter service worker. Each phase has different tasks that supervisors will assign and assist workers in completing. Opening phase, setup. Setup activities take place in the initial hours of a shelter, preparing it for clients to use. Supervisors will determine where to locate activities at the site and direct shelter service workers on how to set up. Typical tasks for workers when setting up the shelter site include unloading and unpacking supplies, setting up tables, desks, and chairs as part of the setup for locations for reception, registration, dormitory, feeding, entertainment, and provision of client services. Assembling and locating cots where directed, and posting signs for clients that display shelter rules, schedule, directions to locations, and other services. You will be directed how to set up the dormitory. We must have emergency exit aisles in all shelters. A dormitory service desk is at the main door and monitors who enters the dormitory. We try to put clients with functional and access needs near emergency exits for rapid escape. As much as possible, we try to provide separate areas for families, single women, and single men. In the operating phase, typical tasks consist of caring for clients and maintaining the shelter. These tasks are shown in the table here and include reception, dormitory registration, food service, interacting with clients, collecting and reporting shelter operational information using various forms, providing information to clients, moving and inventorying supplies, and cleaning the shelter. Many other tasks will also need to be performed by the shelter service worker during the operating phase. Supervisors will direct the work of the shelter service workers. Information gathering and reporting is crucial for an effective shelter. Most shelter tasks have a few forms to complete and information to report. Some examples of this are the shelter shift inspection form and shelter log form. The information is used to help us provide stellar client service, maintain shelter operations, and ensure the shelter has the supplies it needs. You will learn later how to properly complete the forms and report information in case your supervisor asks you to do so. Closing phase. Breakdown activities. Supervisors will direct shelter service workers on breaking down the site. Typical tasks for workers in breaking down the shelter include packing supplies and equipment, folding tables, desks, and chairs and returning to original locations, removing shelter signs, disassembling, cleaning, and packing cots, and facility cleanup aimed at leaving the facility cleaner than when we received it and identifying any damage that occurred during our use. Unit 4, Carrying Out Tasks in the Shelter Functions. The purpose of this unit is to explain tasks specific for each area of the shelter functions that shelter service workers undertake. You receive a job induction and assignment at the shelter. During a job induction, you can expect to learn about the shelter site, discuss your skills and strengths, have expectations set, be assigned a supervisor and know how to contact your supervisor, receive and review your work assignment, exchange contact information, and establish a work schedule. Receiving a job induction is a must to ensure your success in the shelter. Request a job induction if one is not provided. There is always something that needs doing in a shelter. You may be assigned to primarily carry out a single task, such as registration, or you may be assigned to carry out different tasks at different times of the day. When not busy, help colleagues with their tasks or interact with clients. Interacting with clients is something that all shelter workers should be doing because clients are our first priority. When in doubt about anything, ask your supervisor. You aren't expected to know everything in your role as a shelter service worker, and supervisors are there to teach and mentor you. So it's always better to ask than do it wrong. Difficult issues and decisions should be immediately referred to your supervisor. Some examples of difficult issues may be the arrival of a client who is required to report to law enforcement, clients refusing to follow shelter rules, or someone asking to see the registration forms. Tasks in the reception area. Reception is located at the front door to the shelter. The space should have been arranged during setup to funnel traffic so no one can enter the shelter without being received by a reception worker. All workers, clients, and visitors must be greeted and admitted. The functions of reception include controlling physical access to the shelter, keeping out those without reason for being inside the shelter, directing clients to registration for dormitory or other services, answering questions about services, directing to services in other locations, and signing in and out staff, visitors, media, and registered dormitory clients. You will learn the forms required to do this later. Tasks in the reception area. Reception may be separate from registration or combined depending on the size of the shelter, the number of clients, and the workforce. Create and maintain space for clients to wait comfortably for registration and services, a table for information, and a table for snacks and water, along with chairs for those who need seating. Signage should be posted where directed by the supervisor. Signage will include signs directing people to areas where services are being provided, signs welcoming service animals, prominently placed outside the facility entrance and inside the reception and registration areas, signs welcoming everyone and providing basic rules and schedule, and a sign directing clients to check out upon leaving the shelter and check in upon returning. Who comes to reception and what do you do? For these groups of clients, you will be instructed how to address their needs, how to sign them in and out, how to handle them appropriately. They are clients seeking shelter, clients seeking information and services, Red Cross staff, partners working in the shelter, people volunteering to help or make donations, and other members of the public. These groups of clients require unique handling. Always get your supervisor immediately. They are public officials, law enforcement, media, individuals seeking people who may be clients, and unaccompanied minors. Sometimes individuals who are combative or seem like they may pose a safety risk arrive at the shelter. Immediately inform your supervisor or ask for assistance from disaster mental health, law enforcement, or security personnel present. Tasks in dormitory registration. Assist clients to identify their immediate need using the first section of shelter dormitory registration form. Determine if they need first aid or other care. If they have immediate needs, take care of those before completing registration. Register clients into the dormitory and make referrals for clients with needs using the shelter referral log. Hand out welcome information. Complete and file shelter client storage agreement if needed and storage is available. You have important roles in protecting client privacy and confidentiality. When protecting client privacy, be sure to create privacy when discussing personal information with clients. To accomplish this, do it away from other clients if possible. Do not speak too loudly and watch for others who might be listening. To protect their information and records, do not allow unauthorized people to view any records. Do not reveal whether specific clients are present if asked. Get a supervisor whenever this occurs. Tasks in the dormitory. Protect the privacy, safety, and well-being of clients by making sure the dormitory is secure and sanitary. The dormitory is a private place for residents that is closed to unauthorized persons. Make sure that entrance and exit controls are set up and sleeping areas are monitored, especially at night. Ensure clients are not storing extra food in the sleeping area. Enforce no smoking, no vaping, no alcohol, no illegal drugs, and no weapons rules. Make sure aisles, emergency exits, and access to fire extinguishers are not blocked. Watch out for hazards or any dangerous behavior. Tasks in the dormitory. Post Red Cross signage in the dormitory, including directions to services, times for lights out and quiet hours in the dormitory, shelter rules, schedule, and information. Maintain cleanliness and sanitation by picking up trash on the floor, emptying trash cans, mopping up spills, and disinfecting surfaces, door handles, and all high-touch surfaces. If you suspect or observe abuse or neglect of a child or vulnerable adult, domestic violence, or human trafficking, report it to your supervisor immediately. The most important dormitory task is to support and interact with clients. Here are some ways to provide this important task. Ask how they are doing and if they need anything. Offer assistance to anyone who appears to need it. Pay attention for clients not eating, seeming distressed, ill, or in need of other care. Offer help. Tell your supervisor or make an entry in the referral log. Answer their questions and find answers if you don't know them. The most important dormitory task. We use client interactions to learn about and understand client needs, to encourage them and raise their morale, to get them thinking about their next steps, and to learn what we can do to make their stay better. Tasks in feeding. At times, shelter service workers may be asked to help create and keep clients in an orderly feeding line and follow sanitary practices at the service table. Some key tasks to perform in support of feeding shelter clients are clean and sanitize feeding and dining surfaces before and after meals, wash and disinfect your hands and wear gloves and a hat or hairnet, replenish snacks and drinks, and help serve meals. If someone has specific dietary needs, such as diabetic or vegan, report it to the supervisor immediately. and count meals and snacks served and feeding supplies used and remaining for resupply. There are 3 feeding areas that need to be set up and maintained in each shelter. Just like in other areas of the shelter, sanitation in these areas is very important, as well as following safe food handling procedures. The information area is the central location for clients and others to get information they need. Providing information and assistance are the tasks performed in the information area. You can expect to perform these tasks: answer questions and find answers that you don't know, provide updates on the disaster and relief operations, identify location of services offered in the shelter, post lists of available community resources and services, post shelter rules and routines, offer reunification services, including safe and well and messages from friends and family, offer opportunities to assist in the shelter, direct shelter residents where to go with problems and complaints, and oversee communication devices provided for clients, including telephones and computers. Tasks involving shelter supplies include the following: unloading and storing supplies, unpacking supplies, moving supplies to where they are needed in the shelter, and conducting supply inventory and report it using the shelter inventory form. Many activities by specialized workers take place in shelters. These may include disaster health services, disaster mental health, disaster spiritual care, and licensed child care. Shelter service workers may occasionally be asked to assist these service providers. Disaster health services will address the public health concerns if there are any illnesses in the shelter. Unit 5, Making the Commitment to Shelter Clients. The purpose of this unit is to refocus attention on our clients and on our commitment to helping them in time of disaster, and also to conclude this training course. As shelter workers, we put into practice our commitment to help those affected by disasters and embrace the Red Cross philosophy and principles of sheltering. Our commitment as shelter workers is to take care of the sheltering needs of people affected by disaster. We are committed to providing shelter on an interim basis while our clients arrange for their recovery or until they are able to return home. We demonstrate this commitment in our sheltering program principles. What's next, you might ask? Indicate your availability to respond to a disaster assignment in Volunteer Connection. Consider taking additional training to complete the Mass Care Sheltering Service Associate gap. There is an entire support system for people working in shelters and opportunities for advancement. In some situations, you might get a field promotion, that is, a temporary assignment, to a higher sheltering position that will allow you to try it out. At these times, you will receive guidance on how to do it and be successful. Serving disaster-affected clients in the shelter environment can be a very rewarding experience. Listen to these insights from some of our experienced shelter volunteers.
Seeing a smile on someone's face who is hurting, feeling their hugs of gratitude, and watching them leave the shelter with their heads held higher as a result of the help they received gives my life purpose.
It is one of the most critical services immediately after a disaster. With a shelter population being so diverse and with so many personalities, the environment is so dynamic and complex that workers need to be flexible to accommodate to their needs.
Shelter work provides a safe place for people to go when they have nowhere to turn. I get the satisfaction of providing a safe place, meals, and assistance to help them restart their lives.
To complete this course for Red Cross training credit, you will view these short training presentations about filling out essential shelter forms. Each video takes about 3 to 5 minutes to complete. When you have viewed them all, course completion will be recorded in your training transcript. Thank you for preparing to support clients in a disaster shelter. Contributing your time and compassion to those affected by disaster helps them in ways they will never forget.
This video is part of a series of videos intended to give an overview of the forms used by the American Red Cross in our shelter operations. The Shelter Client Sign-In Form is a critical record for the operation of every congregate shelter that we open. This form is intended to maintain a current, accurate list of which clients are physically inside the shelter at any given moment. Every shelter has a prepared evacuation plan, which will outline what to do if the building has to be evacuated. The plan will designate a meeting place for all clients and staff and visitors, where the shelter manager will make sure everyone is out of the shelter, which means that the shelter manager has to know who was inside before the emergency. This form, combined with the separate shelter staff sign-in form and shelter visitor sign-in form, has that information. This form is maintained at the registration desk, which everyone must pass on their way into or out of the shelter. Each client is asked to enter their information as they enter or exit. Since the form contains personal information, it should not be left at the registration desk if no staffer is present. It must be stored in a secure manner on location, usually in the shelter logbook. The top row of the form should look very familiar to you. It contains the date this page was started, the identifying number of the disaster response, and the name or location of the shelter. This information is entered by the registration worker assigned to the registration desk when the previous page is full and this one is started. The registration desk in every shelter is located at a choke point, a place everyone must pass to enter any part of the shelter or to leave. As each client passes in either direction, he or she is asked to fill out this form. One family member may enter the information for the whole family, but each line is intended for a single person. Time in. If the client is entering the shelter, the time is recorded. The new or returning column indicates whether or not the client must undergo the intake process or has already done so. Time out. A client leaving the shelter marks the time here. The temporary or final exit information is important. We need to know whether this client will return, which impacts our feeding and dormitory operations, as well as the midnight count of shelter residents. Contact information. It's important that we be able to contact the client with information or to track their whereabouts. This is almost always the client's cell phone number. Notes is the place to record additional information that's relevant. The client's destination, anticipated return, and so on. The Shelter Client Sign-In Form is a critical snapshot of the current client population in our shelter. This video is part of a series intended to give you an overview of the forms used by the American Red Cross in our shelter operations. The Client Storage Agreement form is used to lay out the terms under which we will accept a client's personal belongings for temporary storage. The form provides the client with a written receipt for his or her personal belongings, which the Red Cross has agreed to store temporarily. Clients arrive at our shelters at what is probably one of the most terrible moments in their lives. Their homes are uninhabitable, and they turn to us for help. Often, the clients will arrive at our shelter with everything they were able to gather up before leaving home, and they will ask us to store their belongings for them. In many cases, we will be able to accommodate this request. This form is a summarized inventory of the client's belongings and also confirms to us exactly who has the owner's permission to access those belongings. This is the top half of the Shelter Client Storage Agreement, and it's filled out by the Red Cross staffer who is accepting the belongings for temporary storage. The top box contains identifying information, the date we accept the belongings, the disaster response number, the client's cot number in the dormitory, the shelter location, and where we will store the belongings. It also identifies the client who will sign the form and one additional person who is authorized to access the belongings. We ask for 2 telephone numbers if available. The second box is the brief inventory of belongings, the number of boxes, plastic tubs, bags, and other containers we're being asked to store. Note that we do not inventory the container's specific contents. If at all possible, each container should be sealed with tape before we accept it. This is the bottom half of the shelter client storage agreement. It lays out the limits of our responsibilities and lists several specific items which the client agrees are not in any of the containers. It's important that the client actually reads and understands all 6 terms detailed here. The client's signature at the bottom completes this form, which is then stored with the client's registration form in a secure place. For more information on how and where we can store client belongings, search the exchange for Caring for Client Belongings tip sheet. This video is part of a series intended to give an overview of the forms used by the American Red Cross in our shelter operations. The Shelter Dormitory Registration Form is the record of the client intake interview conducted when someone first enters our shelter. The form collects information about a client who will use our dormitory, including information about the family members who arrive at the same time. The intake interview allows the Red Cross staffer an opportunity to assess the client's needs, which can be met by our other services, such as disaster spiritual care, disaster health services, disaster mental health, disability integration, disaster assessment, and service to armed forces, as well as to our external partners, such as the Federal Emergency Management Agency, the Department of Defense, and Veterans Administration. As part of the interview, the Red Cross staffer will also be able to identify a client who has immediate needs, such as isolation, personal assistance, or dietary restrictions, allergies, or religious practice. This is the top half of the Shelter Client Dormitory Registration Form. The top line contains the date of registration, the disaster response number, and the name of the shelter. The reception staffer fills in this line of information. The top box contains valuable guidelines for the registration staffer and 2 important questions to be asked early in the interview. The answers to these 2 questions will identify a client who needs immediate help from one of our support departments or from an outside partner. A positive response here to either question should be reported to your supervisor or to the shelter manager as soon as possible. The household information is self-explanatory. It's important that all boxes be filled in, no blanks. Enter either a 0 or not applicable or unknown if necessary. This is the bottom half of the Shelter Client Dormitory Registration Form. It's important that, if possible, the form is filled out by the registration staffer. This gives you the opportunity to observe the client's demeanor, to gauge the possibility that he or she needs immediate assistance from one of our Red Cross support departments or outside partners. The top box records information for each member of the client's family who arrives at the same time. Additional members of the family who arrive later should be added to this form at that time. We ask for the name, age, gender, and arrival date for each member of the family. The cot number will be filled in by the dormitory supervisor. Enter whether or not the client and family members are willing to volunteer to help run the shelter. The right 2 columns are filled in when the client and family members leave for the last time. The final 3 questions in this box are important. The first one is intended to identify anyone who is required to report to law enforcement, such as a parolee or a person convicted of a sexual offense. A positive answer to this first question should be reported to the shelter manager before the client and family leave the registration desk. In most cases, this question will elicit a puzzled reaction from the client who doesn't really understand the question. We accept that as a no. The second question allows us to identify someone who might be eligible for assistance from the Department of Defense or the Veterans Affairs Agency. The third question is really a statement. The Red Cross needs permission from the client in order to share his or her information with other disaster agencies, such as FEMA, State Emergency Management, or county and city EMS agencies. We only share the information when we are seeking special assistance for the client. But please note that a yes is not required to register. A no is acceptable and will be respected. The client's signature and the date, the registration staffer's signature and printed name complete the form. This form and the information it contains is never shared with anyone who is not a Red Cross person, who needs the information, and who is authorized to see it. Since the form obviously contains personal and confidential information, it is kept in a secure location, usually in the registration folder or book in the Red Cross shelter office. This video is part of a series intended to give an overview of the forms used by the American Red Cross in our shelter operations. The Shelter Inventory Form is used to provide a snapshot of all Red Cross and external partner equipment and materiel physically at the shelter. The Red Cross deploys hundreds of thousands of dollars in equipment and supplies to support a major disaster operation. Keeping track of everything is not only good management, it can represent a major financial saving to the organization. If we don't have to buy a replacement item, we save the money. When a shelter is opened, that operation is jump-started with everything needed for the anticipated population. Everything from cots and blankets to clipboards and pencils and coffee pots. Multiply that inventory by the dozens of shelters we open during a level 7 operation, the largest that we do, and we're talking about real money. It is the responsibility of the shelter manager and the Red Cross staffers to keep track of that inventory, and the Shelter Inventory Form is the main tool for that task. We start when the shelter is opened and create the first one. We create a new one on a schedule set by the shelter manager, every 2 days, every week, whatever the DR needs. And we create a final one at shelter closing. The completed forms are turned in at headquarters by the shelter manager after the shelter closes. This is the Shelter Inventory Form. We've removed blank lines in the middle of the page at the red line. At the top of the form, we write the date of this inventory, the disaster response number, and the name of the shelter. The staffer conducting the inventory fills in this information. The top box represents the parameters of this specific inventory, whose equipment and supplies we're counting, when we're doing the counting, and what areas of the shelter we're inspecting to get the counts. Shelter staffers will normally fill out one of these forms for each source of equipment. Obviously, most of our stuff will come from the Red Cross, but we have many external partners who will lend equipment to the shelter to be used by the clients. Large screen TVs, washer dryers, cell phone chargers, etc. To use this set of circumstances, we would fill out 4 inventory forms, one each for the Red Cross, for the television sets, the washer dryers, and a 4th one for the cell phone chargers. Each line of the form is intended for a single item. We record the name of the item, the quantity we have on hand, and what's going to happen to it when the shelter is closed. This sample form would be used for Red Cross equipment and supplies. These items will all be returned to logistics when the shelter is closed. Maintaining this count as accurately and completely as possible will make a big difference to the Red Cross bottom line, and to make sure equipment loaned to us by external partners will be returned where necessary. That will make our external partners happy, which means they'll be there for us the next time around. This video is part of a series intended to give an overview of the forms used by American Red Cross in our shelter operations. The shelter log form is used to record anything and everything that happens at the shelter. There are two main uses for this log form: as a shelter log, which records the usual and unusual happenings in the daily life of a shelter, such as staff changes, deliveries, donations, success stories, lessons learned. In short, it's the diary of the operation. But this form is also used as a manager's log. It serves as a record of running the shelter: staff issues, personnel problems, client complaints, solutions, arrival of unaccompanied minors, medical issues. Everything that in the shelter manager's mind rises to the level of "talk to my boss about this." Both versions of this form are considered confidential, and as such must be stored in a secure manner and location. Additionally, it should be noted that the manager's log is only to be shared with the supervisor of the other shift and with an incoming replacement manager. This is the shelter log form. In this case, it contains entries relevant to the general operation and the manager of the shelter to illustrate what would be written in both versions. The top box records the date this page was started, the number of the disaster operation, and the name of the shelter. The Red Cross staffer assigned to maintain this log by the shelter manager, or the shelter manager him or herself, will fill in this line. The form is simple in an attempt to allow details to be entered about the whole gamut of issues that arise in the life of a shelter. It has only 3 columns: the date and time of the entry, details of the entry, and what follow-up is needed. Let's take the first entry as an example of what would be written in the shelter manager's log. Shelter manager Bill Jones wrote this entry at 2:30 a.m. on May the 25th. The Smith family arrived at the shelter and registered. During the intake interview, James Smith said that yes, he was required to report to law enforcement when he spends the night somewhere other than his home. Bill called his boss, the headquarters sheltering manager, and reported the information. Bill was promised a call back with further instructions, but in the meantime, they agreed that the Smith family should be accommodated in a private room away from the main dormitory. In this case, Bill assigned them to room 114, and follow-up is required. The information is now recorded, the actions taken are noted, and it's in the log as an open issue. Now look at line 4. At 2 p.m. the same day, the day shelter manager received a call from the HQ sheltering manager advising her that James Smith is not required to report to law enforcement. So she moved the family out of room 114 back into the general dormitory. Issue closed. It bears repeating that these 2 entries would be in the shelter manager's log. They are confidential and will be kept private. The other 3 entries, on lines 2, 3, and 5, are typical of the entries made in the shelter log. When a disaster operation is concluded and the volunteers scatter to the 4 corners of the United States, the shelter manager's logs and the shelter logs are studied by Red Cross headquarters personnel. That's how the organization learns to do better the next time around. And unfortunately, there will be a next time around. This video is part of a series intended to give an overview of the forms used by the American Red Cross in our shelter operations. The shelter referral log form is used to record all referrals made by shelter staffers to other Red Cross support teams. On a major disaster operation, sheer numbers make keeping track of clients a difficult task. When it seems that every client requires assistance from our fellow Red Cross volunteers, something is bound to fall through the cracks. This form helps make sure that that doesn't happen. Whether the client needs a referral to disaster spiritual care, disaster health services, disaster mental health, disability integration, disaster assessment, whatever the other team is, we can provide the referral and keep track of it on this form. This is the shelter referral log form. Several blank lines have been removed at the diagonal red line for clarity. The top information should be very familiar to you by now: the date this page was started, the official identification number of the disaster operation, and the name of the shelter. The Red Cross staffer assigned to maintain this log will fill in this line. Each line of boxes on the form is intended to contain the information for one client or one family unit referred to another department. Date and time of referral, the client's name, the client's cell phone number, a brief general note of the client's needs, and the team to whom the client was referred. Two cautions. First, we do need a correct cell phone number. The other team can't help if they can't get a hold of the client. And second, keep the client need notes general. Don't write a diagnosis. Don't say schizophrenic. Say emotional support. We're shelter volunteers. We are not licensed physicians. There's no column on this form for the name of the shelter staffer doing the referring, nor the name of the person on the support team to whom the staffer talks to initiate the referral. But it's a good idea to add that information to the client needs box. And if you take another line to do that, so be it. This form contains personal and confidential information, and therefore needs to be kept in a secure location. This video is part of a series intended to give an overview of the forms used by the American Red Cross in our shelter operation. The Shelter Shift Inspection form is used to record a snapshot of the shelter condition twice a day at each shift change. When two teams of 2 volunteers each are running a shelter, keeping track of everything is relatively simple. When it's a mega shelter with hundreds of volunteer staffers and 9,000 clients, that's a whole different proposition. We normally run our shelters on 2 12-hour shifts, and the incoming and outgoing shift supervisors will do a walk-around together and chat about what happened in the last 12 hours. This form records the observations made by these 2 supervisors: a new scratch on the gym floor, outside signs ruined by rain, a broken door handle, a leaky faucet in the ladies' room. It's all relevant to the shift inspection log. This is the top half of the shelter shift inspection form. It begins with the date of the inspection, the number of the disaster response, and the name of the shelter. The top box notes the time of the inspection and the people doing it, the incoming shift, day or night, the time of the inspection, and the 2 people who conduct it. The first box covers some general items and requires only a yes, no, or not applicable response. Note that all no responses need to be explained. The space for that is in the next slide, showing the bottom half of the form. This is the bottom half of the shelter shift inspection form. It contains another 13 more specific items, this time about the interior of the shelter space. Again, yes, no, or not applicable are the answers. At the bottom is a box for notes and explanations for all no responses to any question on the whole page, top half or bottom half. And remember, if an item is serious enough to be entered in the shift inspection log, it's important enough to bring to the attention of the shelter manager, who will, in all probability, discuss it with the HQ sheltering manager. This form is filed in the shelter logbook and kept in the shelter office. This video is part of a series intended to give an overview of the forms used by the American Red Cross in our shelter operations. The shelter staff sign-in form is a critical record for the operation of every congregate shelter we open. The form is intended to maintain a current, accurate list of which staffers are physically inside the shelter at any given moment. Every shelter has a prepared evacuation plan, which will outline what to do if the building has to be evacuated. The plan will designate a meeting place for all clients and staff, where the shelter manager will make sure everyone is out of the shelter, which means the shelter manager has to have that information about who is inside the shelter before the emergency happened. This form, combined with the separate shelter client sign-in form, has that information. The form is maintained at the registration desk, which everyone must pass on their way into or out of the shelter. Each staffer is asked to enter their information as they come in or leave. Since the form contains personal information, it must be stored in a secure manner and location, usually in the administration kit in the staff office. This is the form. The top row should look very familiar to you as it contains the date this page was started, the identifying number of the disaster response, and the name or location of the shelter. This information is entered by the registration worker assigned to the desk when the previous page is full and this page is started. The registration desk in every shelter is located at a choke point, a place where everyone must pass to enter any part of the shelter or to leave. As each staffer passes in either direction, he or she is asked to fill out this form. Each line is intended for a single person. Name, ID, position. The first three columns are for the staffer's name, Red Cross ID badge number, and assigned position on the shelter staff. Time in, time out, and hours worked. This provides a daily record of this staffer's hours. Lodging and transportation. This last column has information that is needed by logistics to keep track of the number of rental cars and hotel rooms that the Red Cross is paying for. The shelter staff sign-in form, a critical snapshot of the current staff population in our shelter. This video is part of a series intended to give an overview of the forms used by the American Red Cross in our shelter operations. The Shelter Visitor and Media Sign-In form is a critical record for the operation of every congregate shelter we open. The form is intended to maintain a current, accurate list of visitors who are physically inside the shelter at any given moment. Every shelter has a prepared evacuation plan, which will outline what to do if the building has to be evacuated. The plan will designate a meeting place for all clients and staff and visitors, where the shelter manager will make sure everyone is out of the shelter, which means that the shelter manager has to have that information about who was inside the shelter before the emergency happened. This form, combined with the separate shelter client and shelter staff sign-in forms, has that information. This form is maintained at the registration desk, which everyone must pass on their way into or out of the shelter. Every visitor is asked to enter their information when they arrive or leave. Since the form contains personal information, it must be stored in a secure manner and location, usually in the administration kit box in the staff office. This is the form itself. The top row should look very familiar to you. It contains the date this page was started, the identifying number of the disaster response, and the name or location of the shelter. This information is entered by the registration worker assigned to the desk when the previous page is full and this page is started. The registration desk in every shelter is located at a choke point, a place everyone must pass to enter any part of the shelter or to leave. As each visitor arrives or leaves, he or she is asked to fill out this form. Each line is intended for a single person. First rule: no visitors may enter the dormitory without permission from the shelter manager and the approval of all clients present in the dormitory. Visitors may have access to the public areas of the shelter, but must always be accompanied by a Red Cross staffer. This form is also used to record visits by members of the media, to whom special protocols and some special rules apply. No recordings may be made, audio or video, within the dormitory, and elsewhere only with the prior knowledge and consent of the shelter manager. When any member of the media arrives, the shelter manager is to be notified immediately and will handle the media visitors from there. It's important to note that no client may be recorded, by accident even or incidentally, without their express consent. Again, when in doubt, ask your supervisor or the shelter manager. Information on the form: date, name, time in, time out. Ask the visitor to fill this out, himself or herself. Organization and contact information. In the case of a family visitor, this is the name of the client they wish to visit. In the case of the media, it's the name of the outlet they represent, the newspaper, the channel, or the radio station. Get a business card from anyone in the media. Name of escort, follow-up needed, and notes. No visitor may pass the registration desk into the shelter, into any part of the shelter, without an escort. Period. No exceptions. Call your supervisor or shelter manager and request that an escort be assigned and sent to the registration table. Then put the name of that escort into this form.